Can I have my first slide, please, Bryn? Oh, what's going on? Oh dear, look at you. You ruined everything.
Sorry.
This is already bad enough. I've been given like this thing to hold, and I've also got this thing to hold, and I've got this, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I might put this handheld mic down. I mean, I don't know how loud I am. Is this okay?
Fine.
Christine, am I okay? Okay, will this affect the recording if I don't use the handheld mic? A shrug. I'm going to put it down. This is unprecedented territory. Should I turn it off? Thank you. All right, okay, so it's really good to be back. Oh, gosh. Don't. I'm not going to be able to continue. I'm just going to like dissolve. I've had a really tough week and it's only Tuesday. What is going on today? All right, so the working title for this talk was, yes, I'm talking about representation again. Fight me! And have I done a thing? Has it gone wrong?
I don't know, where did you put the hand?
That is sabotage twice already. But yeah, that's no longer the title, but the sentiment, I know, I should have stuck with it. The sentiment still exists, because I'm really angry. I found this out on Thursday last week, and I yelled at some men who catcalled me, and it was really empowering, and I spent the rest of the time going to the train station thinking, are they going to follow me? Am I going to have to do some jiu-jitsu on some guys? I don't remember any jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I got quite a lot of anger, and it all came out in this talk. Also, solidarity to all the junior doctors today. And fuck the Tories. So hard. Anyway, I like to have some facts to back up some of my thoughts. So I went and found a report on the attitudes and satisfaction of game developers by the International Game Developers Association. Can I have the next slide? That's their logo. I print screened it. So there was a study that was published in September 2015, and they surveyed almost 3,000 people. The aim of the study was to look at rates of satisfaction in the industry, like who they thought were the best people to work for and stuff like that, but they necessarily had to do some demographics for it. So it showed what we all know to be true, but I was like, I want to get stats, because there's always that one person who's like, oh, well, I don't believe it. And you're like, but it's there. Anyway, so it showed 75% male, 22% female, 1.2% trans, and 9 people as non-binary. In terms of race, 76% white, then East Asian, 9%. So I just want to repeat that. The biggest racial percentage after white was 9%. That is what we're looking at. Then the biggest one after that is Hispanic or Latino at 7.3%, and then Black, African or African American at 3%. The trend continues in a very expected way. 73% identified as heterosexual, 78% did not consider themselves as having a disability, etc. Though interestingly, most of the people who did consider themselves as having a disability said they had a mental illness, which I think is really interesting, considering some of the games that have come out exploring that kind of thing, exploring depression. And so yeah, I think that's good to explore those things. Yeah, so far so predictable. I'm not going to get into why that is, because that's a talk in itself. But I want to point out a particular paragraph in the summary of the survey. Can I have the next slide? All right. I'm going to read it anyway. In the general population of respondents, while the concern for diversity in the workplace is still important, 2/3 of respondents are concerned about this, is decreasing from past years, whereas 71% of respondents are still concerned with diversity in games. Now, this is quite interesting for me to note, because it appears to show that developers think that the importance of diversity in their workplace is decreasing, but diversity within the actual games they're making is still important. And like, maybe I'm being harsh, but I think those two things are connected. I think that the diversity of a workplace has an impact on the product that you make, because it just does. I'm not going to give you stats for that. That's just a fact that will happen. But the presence of people like me in a space does not inherently mean it is inclusive. You have to think about, what does it feel like for me? Am I respected as much or taken as seriously as my white male colleagues? How am I treated by management and by my peers? Am I the only queer woman, disabled person, person of colour in this office? These are all really pertinent questions because it affects how my contributions to the workplace are going to be seen. All right. I'm getting slightly off track because the most pertinent question to this actual talk is, am I having a valued impact on the games that we are producing? Are you listening to me when I tell you that the way you're writing this character is racist? Or are you sticking to your default white male because it's easy and you understand how to write them, because it's basically writing a power fantasy? Next slide. Yay! I don't even know who these people are, and I don't really have to. Like, they're all grumpy sods. Ooh, I'm so gruff. The issue is that we all want characters that we can relate to. But a lot of the time, people think that relatability exclusively means looking like me. And sometimes it does. I loved Clementine in the Walking Dead games because, like, oh my God, it's a mixed race girl as a protagonist. And she's not incredibly annoying as a child. Like, you're like, oh, let me save you from the zombies and cut off my arm and spoilers. But yeah, I don't actually recommend that game for small children. They just have to wait. But it's not just about looking familiar. Recently, I found a character that I identified with profoundly, and it was in a book from 1928, and it's called The Well of Loneliness. The protagonist of that book is very different to me. She is a lesbian called Stephen, who is an aristocrat's daughter with a huge fortune to inherit. It did get banned for obscenity, obviously, because it's about lesbians, and it was 1928. But yeah, so she's white, I'm black. She's rich and owns a mansion. I don't. She's from the south of England, I'm from the north, so you can't tell unless I'm swearing or angry. And, well, maybe I say laugh, grass, bath, but yeah. She's from the 1920s. And she has all of the patriotic and imperialistic values of that. She goes off to the Second World War. And I'm the literal opposite of that. But there were other places where we connected. We both had a father that died unexpectedly. That father was in a study that had tons of books where we would sit together and read and bond over the things and discuss stuff. We were both left with a mother that we have really complicated relationships with. We both got bullied by other kids for being different and felt like outcasts. We both owe a lot to the landscape that we grew up in and feel an affinity with the natural world. We're both incredibly sentimental towards our childhood homes. I actually started writing a Twine game, and it was called Please Don't Sell the House, because my mum keeps saying, oh, I want to move. But then she goes and looks at her place and she's like, oh, it doesn't face some fields. And I'm like, Mum, this is 2016. There are no fields left. She always finds like a little thing. She's spending so much money on... Anyway, it's this kind of similarity that matters, because these things go a lot deeper than this character is black. Therefore, black people will identify with them. Not only does that assumption often rely on stereotypes of what it means to be black, but it also ignores that there are experiences that go further and deeper than skin colour. And there are obviously experiences that go with it, but there are things that I will share with a white person that I might not share with a black person. Depending on what you want to do with your game, you may or may not want to include racism towards a black character. But my view is that if you are setting it in the modern day or in the past, don't pretend that it didn't exist or that the black character has exactly the same history as a white character would have. And in the same vein, do not presume that the actual player is white. As I may have mentioned in other talks, BioShock Infinite seemed to completely forget that black people exist as gamers. Next slide, please. To include a scene of an interracial couple being stoned is bad enough. To be given the option to throw stones at them left a bad taste in my mouth. I wasn't even playing the game. And now I never will. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to find the developers of that game and tie them to chairs and yell at them until they understood what it's like to see such a stark reminder of slavery, of systemic racism, of the fact that there are still people to this day who think of you and your people as lesser, of all the times in your life that you have been treated as lesser, been shouted at and taunted in the street, something that is so horrific to have to live with. And then it's in a game that you're meant to be playing for fun? Why is that there? And it's because they didn't think of me when they were making that game. But getting back to relatability, there's absolutely no way that I can then relate to a character that just walks away from that, because that's basically the choice you have. It's either join in or walk away, and it's not stop it. But they never thought, what impact might this have on any of my black players? Might it put them off a bit? And it somehow went through several layers of approval without anyone batting an eyelid. I mean, I understand how that happens. I'm in a very bureaucratic workplace at the moment, and we managed to get all the way to a banner being published and put up in the foyer, and it had a typo on it. And I was like, this is why I'm here. Show me your banners. But I write the copy, ostensibly. The only good thing I can say about this scene is that it at least gave you an early warning to turn it off right at the beginning. Or in my case, decide not to buy the fucking thing. It's best for me not to talk about Daisy Fitzroy, other than to say she deserved so much better. So yeah, I'm never ever going to play this game, and I don't care how good the graphics are. With that said, we'll get back to this thing where there's an industry of mainly white males being asked to write characters with traits that they themselves do not possess. And what do the majority of them have to go on? It's stereotypes. And I confess, when I was writing this, I suddenly wondered, am I being uncharitable? I've seen many, many games where developers have tried harder and dug deeper, have done really well, mostly indie games. If you couldn't tell already, this talks mostly about the AAAs. But then I remembered about this game. Next slide. I stopped feeling bad. This was and is a travesty. If you don't do this, then fine. This part of the talk is not aimed at you. But if your characters act in a way that the developer thinks, well, I mean, that's not particularly issue with this. This is just symbolic of sort of this herd mentality that some people think that African people have. This primitive view that is taken of us, like the way that we do things is inherently inferior. There's things when colonialists first went to African villages, they thought, oh, all these huts are arranged in really random patterns. Why don't they just have straight lines? But it was fractals. It was mathematical circles. But yeah, that's not in the script. Let's get back to it. If your characters act in the way that a developer thinks is the way that all black people or all African people act, i.e. stereotyping them, then we won't identify with them because they are not three-dimensional and they are not believable to us. We don't believe that the character or characters would really act like that because we know what we're actually like. We're not just strong and kind and endlessly forgiving and wise and funny and eventually just the impetus for the main protagonist to go after the villain. We're also fragile and cruel and independent and with our own histories and our own grudges that if you're wise, and it's that kind of game, you'll turn to a really cool side quest you can bond with. It'll be really nice. We're complicated. We're nearly there. But that last part is some of the problem for Mr. Everyman as well, because Mr. Everyman cannot be complicated, because then he cannot be relatable to everyone. But for most, instead of figuring out whether there's a third way, whether there's a way of making a character both complicated and relatable, a lot of developers end up just relying on whatever model worked before and figuring that will do. And unless you have the mindset of Gamergate, in which case being white and male is enough for relatability for everyone, and by everyone they mean them, this will in fact not do. Because you have to To make a game that has an impact, you have to confront people with the unexpected. And to do that, you have to take them beyond what they already know. So to just put the person that they already know in front of them constantly to play is stupid. We'll go with that word. And the other thing is that giving your characters diversity will also not only just represent us, but it will make people feel more sympathetic towards, because there are places still where people don't know black people. They live in a place where there is just white people. There's villages in Lincolnshire where I grew up. There was one time I was in sixth form and there was going to be an exchange in the school in Senegal. And one of the girls went, "Oh, what am I going to eat when we go there? They don't have any cows." I looked at her and I went, "We have cows!" What? And it was because she was in such a cloistered community. But anyway, if they're going to get interaction with people of colour, if they're not going to get that through the actual environment, then they're going to have to get it from fiction. They're going to have to get it from games. And so you have to put them there and say, look, these are people. These are actual, they're like you. But yeah, there are some things, of course, that most white men will have in common in the same way that there are things that most black women will have in common. That's why people of colour and women of colour, because that's a thing. This is why we create safe spaces, because we can share all of our similar experiences and know that someone there understands exactly what we're talking about. But those shared things tend to be things related to socio-political expectations and capitalist pressure for conformity. I was so pleased with that sentence. For example, men shouldn't cry. When was the last time that you saw Mr. Everyman cry, like properly cry, not just a single manly tear? And when was the last time you saw him break down instead of turning his really obvious pain into anger that he then uses to defeat the villain? That's such a cliche. And also, it's expedient for the plot. Next slide. There's another issue here, which is that we, all of us, are used to having to identify with white male characters written by white male writers, and we're all having to do so still. They are the protagonists in 95% of the books we grew up with when we were first learning what narratives and character development were. And so the thoughts and feelings and stories of fictional white men became familiar to us, predictable. And the same goes for fictional white women to an extent. We are used to these protagonists, way too used to them for there to be any surprises in them when they're played straight. So I think that's my main point. What many game developers think of as relatable is not only dependent on what wider society thinks, but also becoming so overdone that it is boring. I was going to say that I don't need to tell you the tropes that I'm talking about, but this video is going on the internet, so I will specify. I am bored to tears of the gruff white man with a murky past. And I roll my eyes at his damsel in distress, even when they've made her feisty, because that's what a strong woman is now. And I'm exhausted by his or her sassy best friend. Isn't the point of games to give you different experiences? Isn't that the point of art, which I think we all agree games are? There is no point in rehashing the same stories and the same people over and over again. We need to look deeper and think bigger, and most of all, think differently. And then we've got a last slide. And that's me.